You can try to hold back the waves, but they will always wash upon your feet. Two waters flow with a barrier in between, the salty sea and rivers fresh and sweet. Two waters flow with a barrier in between.
Bismillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Dear brothers and sisters, I greet you with the greeting of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome to a new episode of Contemporary Fiqh Issues. We have with us today our special guest, Sheikh Asem bin Luqman al-Hakim. Sheikh Asem is a well-known da'i who has traveled extensively to many countries across the world and has been the leading khatib and imam of a masjid in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia for the last 21 years. Sheikh Asem, welcome.
Jazakumullah khairan, thank you for having me.
Barakallahu feekum. Sheikh Asem, for many Muslims today, it is very difficult for them. They find themselves dealing with issues that aren't necessarily dealt with directly in the Quran and in the Sunnah. We went to the street to find out the opinion of the common Muslim on this issue of fiqh al-nawazil or contemporary fiqh, to see what they had to say about it. Let's go to the footage.
Allah Ta'ala, Allah Ta'ala.
What do you know about fiqh al-nawazil?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. What do I know about fiqh al-nawazil? Fiqh al-nawazil is about a methodology in Islam where we can deal with emergency situations, like in wudu, how we can take a wudu in desert, whereas there's no water present in desert. There's also many things. I think I know about it, not much.
No, I don't know anything.
Fiqh nawazil? Sorry, I'm done now. Fiqh nawazil? Actually, there's no much thing I know about fiqh nawazil. But what I know is fiqh nawazil is about Islam give us some chance in emergency case, such as a pregnant woman. It is not obligatory for her to continue her fasting. If she scared about the baby's condition.
Allah Ta'ala, Allah Ta'ala.
And welcome back, Sheikh, Jazakallah khairan. As we can see, many of the Muslims equate fiqh al-nawazil or contemporary fiqh issues with issues of dururi or issues of necessity. Could you please elaborate on this issue, especially this term that is new to many of us as Muslims?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, sallallahu wasallam wa barak ala abdihi wa rasulih al-ameen, nabiyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. This is quite new to a lot of the Muslims, as it's a branch of science that not a lot of Muslims know about, simply because it is not addressed to the mass or to the public. Only a handful of scholars who are qualified to discuss these things know about it. Yet, this branch of fiqh is very important, because we know that jurisprudence or Islamic fiqh is divided into a number of categories. So there is the fiqh that deals with forms of worship, such as purification, prayers, fasting. And there is another part of fiqh that deals with transactions, and so on. Fiqh al-nawazil is the understanding of the nazila, which is the singular of nawazil, which is a plural name of it. And if you look at the origin of the word nazila, it comes from the word descending. So it is engaged, it is focused on studying issues that are happening in contemporary times, and they require an Islamic ruling. So there are things that happened at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Quran either answered them, addressed them, or the Prophet ﷺ himself gave the verdict or the Islamic ruling on them. But Islam is a religion that's being revived on and on. It's a living religion. It's not something that is suitable for a particular time or a specific location. It's reoccurring. Things that are reoccurring need to be addressed over and over again. And that is why we need to strive to know the ruling of the Sharia on a particular incident. This is where an-nawazil come in. And there is this terminology of fiqh al-nawazil, which is a general and broad sense of an-nawazil and looking at them. And there is a specific one, which is an-nawazil al-fiqhiyya, which talks only about the incidents that deal with fiqh. So what's the difference? It's very simple. Fiqh al-nawazil, it makes you understand how to deal and treat things that are contemporary. Whether they're religious, they can be related to fiqh, they can be related to aqidah. For example, the new sects, the new creeds and ideologies that are reoccurring or happening for the first time. So this is a nazila that has to be studied thoroughly, and then the verdict would be given. There are things that take place in language, and it's also considered to be a nazila. There are innovations, inventions that are not related to Islam. So these are all called nawazil, and you have to understand how to deal and treat them. What we're focusing on is an-nawazil al-fiqhiyya. And if you look at the word an-nawazil itself, you can look at it from a number of directions. For example, there are, as I've mentioned earlier, looking at them in respect to topics. So is it fiqh, or is it linguistic, or is it science, or is it creed and aqidah? You can look at it in terms of its importance, because there is a nazila that it is extremely important that you have to be very careful when tackling. For example, if it's political, or if it's relating to the welfare of the whole ummah, with respect to when it's about an individual. So this is a nazila, and the other one is also a nazila, but it's a different weight and size. Reoccurrence. You can look at it from the angle of how many times that has happened. There are nawazil that only concern a limited number of people, like political asylum, for example, like seeking the nationality or the citizenship of a non-Muslim country. This is addressing a limited number of people. But there are also something that happens a lot to Muslims, like praying in the airplane. This is something that did not take place at the time of Prophet ﷺ, so we have to give a particular ruling to in this regard. There are things that happen in between. We need to look into them, such as bank accounts, credit cards, etc. So it depends on how you look at it. And of course, the final angle, or one of the angles that you can look at this topic as well, is whether it has an origin that took place at the Salaf's time, or it's completely new.
Salaf meaning earlier generations?
Yes, that's exactly what I meant. Because, for example, if you look at Sperm's Bank, they never had anything, they never anticipated having anything like this. So this is something that's completely new. But if you look at some forms of transactions, such as Bay' al-Murabaha, which is a Murabaha transaction, it's a sort of Islamic financing. Well, this had an origin to it at the time of our predecessors, but it's not exactly as they discussed it. So we have to look into these things, dissect it, analyze it, and then give the ruling of it.
Ahsanallahu alaykum. So what we understand then is that fiqh nawazil or nawazil fiqhiyya is, in general, it's a contemporary issue. It's something where we look at modern day issues and we're trying to understand how Islam can deal with these issues, because there's no direct ruling found in the Quran or in the Sunnah. How does this fall back on the fundamentals of the religion, or looking at the fundamentals when dealing with deciphering these rulings? When the scholars go and issue a ruling, how does it go back to the fundamentals? Can you please explain for us?
Okay, that's a good question. We have to understand, first of all, that it's exactly what you have just mentioned that made these issues come up to the top. This technological advancement, this industrial boom that we are living, calls for new things. And these new things can only be looked at from this branch of fiqh, because it did not have any direct link in the Quran or in the Sunnah directing us to them. And that is why scholars had to put a lot of effort trying to figure out how to give the ruling on such topics and issues. And I believe, I don't know if you share this with me, but I believe that this shows us how strong Islam is and how compatible it is to all times and to all places. I believe that it is a great manifestation that Islam is appropriate for all times and locations.
Barakallahu feekum, ya Sheikh. I don't think there's any Muslim that can disagree with that statement. We'll continue in just a moment, inshallah, after we go to the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Allah Ta'ala, Allah Ta'ala, Allah Ta'ala.
اللهم إني أسألك الفردوس الأعلى من الجنة. اللهم إني أسألك الفردوس الأعلى من الجنة.
Allah Ta'ala, Allah Ta'ala, Allah Ta'ala.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to Contemporary Fiqh Issues in Islam. We were just discussing right before the break with Sheikh Asem bin Luqman al-Hakim. Sheikh Asem, we were discussing the issue of how Islam is a universal religion and it's for all times and place. And one of the miracles of Islam is that it can adapt with an essential look at its fundamentals when addressing any issue, no matter how big or how small. How do Muslims deal with these new issues, these contemporary issues when they come about? Is there a procedure to follow? Is there certain steps that we have to look towards?
I completely agree with the concept, as you've mentioned before the break, that there's no Muslim who does not believe that Islam is suitable for every time and place. I may disagree with this statement because I know that with the influence of different ideologies, there are a number of Muslims who beg to differ. And they think that Islam, it should be isolated in a masjid. It should be kept behind walls. It has nothing to do with finance, politics, economy, art, etc. Thinking that Islam is only restricted to the time of the Prophet ﷺ. This is not true. Islam is suitable for all times simply because Allah Azza wa Jal is the source of Islam. And He created us and He knows what is the best thing for us. Secondly, the Prophet ﷺ, our Prophet, is the seal of prophethood. So there's no prophet or messenger after him, which means that this is the final religion of Allah. The Quran is the final revelation, and this has to go on till the end of time. Therefore, Islam is suitable for all times and for all places. And from this, we understand that a great responsibility lies on the shoulders of scholars who have to contribute positively, and they have to strive and put a lot of effort so that they could give the people the best solution that is stemmed from the Quran and from the Sunnah, and which also calls us to apply Islam in all aspects of our life, not only in our forms of worship, prayer, fasting, etc., but also in politics, in economy, in running the country, because Islam is a way of life. It's not only forms of worship that should be isolated in a masjid or segregated from our life.
Barakallahu feekum, ya Sheikh. Sheikh, but who are the scholars that we should be looking up to when we want answers to these questions? We find many people going with sincere and earnest desire to find a result, whether it be an issue of insurance or issue of healthcare or issues of banking, and we find them going to scholars who many times seem to be leading them astray. So how can we know the righteous scholar and the sincere scholar over the scholar who's basically giving fatwa and giving verdicts for a checkbook every month?
Well, a proper scholar is a person who has the characteristics of a scholar in the sense that he has the knowledge, the proper knowledge. It's not necessarily that he's articulate or he can deliver a beautiful speech. It's not necessarily that he's a good orator, but he has to possess the tools of knowledge, of Islamic knowledge, that gives him the way or the means to give fatwa. So he has to be knowledgeable in Arabic, and without Arabic he cannot be a scholar.
No.
He has to be knowledgeable in fiqh, so he has to know the different schools of thought and what they contributed in our great religion. He has to be extremely knowledgeable in the fundamentals of fiqh, known as usul al-fiqh, which gives him an overview of Islam as rules and guidance that he must follow. He has to be knowledgeable of contemporary issues, so he cannot give fatwa without knowing where this came from. And this is why, if someone asks us, is there a process that we should follow to give a fatwa on such new incidents? And the answer is yes. There is a lengthy process, and there are a number of conditions that should be fulfilled. And among them, you have to visualize an incident. So if you're a sheikh and someone comes to you and says, what's the ruling on X, Y, Z? And you have no idea what X, Y, Z means. If you, like a lot of the people do nowadays, if you shoot from the hip and say it's haram, it's forbidden, or if you say it's halal, it's permissible, you're wrong in both ways.
And it's a form of oppression in either way, because you're either making the religion too easy for someone or too difficult for someone.
Exactly. You have to know what the person asking you the question means. It's not enough for you to say yes or no. So when someone asks you about something, you have to visualize it. If he tells you about a financial transaction and you don't know anything about it, he has to explain it. If he asks you about a medical procedure and you're not a doctor, you're not a physician, you have to ask a physician to explain it to you until you visualize it and have a 360 degrees understanding of it.
So basically, ya Sheikh, we need to have a communion or a union between the scholars of Islam and the scholars of the field which are in question. So if we have a question regarding economics, we need not only a scholar of Islamic jurisprudence to help understand the situation from an Islamic point of view, whether it's permissible or not, But we also at the same time need a scholar of economics to make it clear for the Islamic scholar what exactly that issue entails, and likewise issues of medicine or issues of cosmetics and so on. Is that correct?
This is completely correct. I remember one of my friends who was an airline captain was at the gathering of Sheikh Muhammad ibn Salih al-Uthaymeen, may Allah have mercy on his soul, and the Sheikh was asked about the direction of Qibla in Canada, because it's almost on the other side of Saudi Arabia. So some of them used to pray to the direction of the east, and some would pray to the direction of the west. And the Sheikh did not know what to say until this pilot told him about how things are, and he described it to him over a map and about the distances and how things are, and the Sheikh was very pleased, and he said that we have to have experts in their fields in our gatherings. So whenever we're asked about something that is dealing with economy, an economist would speak. If we have a question about something dealing with medicine, a doctor would speak, and then we give the ruling of Sharia, of Islam, whether it's permissible or not, after understanding it. So this is extremely important. Now, after you visualize it, then you move on to trying to know under what category of Islam it falls under. So now we visualized it, now we have to try to think it over and see that according to the Quran and the Sunnah and the rulings of Islam, we try to know whether it's permissible or not. And how does this come about? For example, when you deposit money in the bank account, now is this money a deposit or is it a loan to the bank? You have to know, because there are differences between a loan and a deposit. If I deposit money with you and the money was destroyed, it was annihilated, the house burnt, for example, without any form of aggression from your side or negligence, it just happened. I have no right to come and tell you, give me my money back, because you were entrusted with it. It was a deposit. While if it were to be a loan, it's a different story, because a loan, you have to pay it back. Whether you lost it, it was burned, it was gone, it was confiscated, it's a loan. It's related to your person, and you have to pay it back regardless. So now, when you look at bank accounts, you try to figure it out. You have to have this realization. I visualized the finance and the bank system. Now I have to visualize under what ruling does it fall in Islam. Is it a loan or is it a deposit? Likewise, in so many things that would add value to you and know how to look into it. I'll give you an example. Scholars say that in order to know under which category it falls under, there are 4 types. One, that falls under a general verse of the Quran or of the Sunnah or of the consensus of scholars. For example, among the contemporary things, if you electrocute an animal and it's dead, so can I eat the meat or not? This falls under the category or the verse of the Quran that it's a dead meat. Whether it was killed by hitting it on the head, electrocuting it, etc., it's dead.
So this has a direct ruling and a direct evidence for
Yes,
it.
this is part 1. Part 2, things that do not have a clear-cut direct ruling, but there is something that took place long ago that we can put it under the same ruling. For example, an open buffet. It's a contemporary thing. You go to hotels, restaurants, you pay a fixed amount of money and you can eat all what you want.
Yeah.
So if you're thin and skinny, and it's different to your consumption if you are big and fat. So scholars said, how can we look at this? How can we figure it out? There is nothing in the Quran or Sunnah that governs this. Yes, but there are similar things that are equal in it.
So using qiyas or analogy. To compare.
Sort of, but to an incident that took place. For example, they measured this to an issue of the public baths.
Barakallahu feekum, Sheikh. Unfortunately, we're just about out of time for today. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
You can try to hold back the waves, but they will always wash upon your feet. Two waters flow with a barrier in between, the salty sea and rivers fresh and sweet. Everything Allah commands to be will always become a reality. Everything Allah commands to be will always become a reality. Allah